and it's my honor to be joined by Joseph Fournier. Dr. Fournier is a seasoned executive and senior scientist with over 15 years of experience in oil sands, power generation,
Ooh.
and environmental technologies across Canada and the US. He has led major energy projects with a focus on technology evaluation and implementation, and he has worked for various Canadian oil and gas companies. He now lives east of Calgary and he runs a ranch. Dr. Fournier, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laurent. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. This is great. Other side of the planet to know.
Great to have you here, and great to that you join the Macro Butler podcast. Uh, I invite you to this podcast because at the Macro Butler, we try to join the dots between finance, macroeconomy, energy, and other data that impact our daily life. And I thought that Dr. Fournier, you will be the perfect fit for this podcast for us to explore the impact of energy supply on our lives. So if maybe we can start maybe from a very uh, deep perspective. Uh, why do you think that cheap and abundant energy are essential for our prosperity?
The simplest analogy that I like to think of is an Olympian, right? If you give a expensive energy, uh, expecting your economy and your, a given, even a simple, like a small unit, like a household, expecting people to function day to day with high productivity, with high energy costs, is really quite similar to, I'd say, asking an Olympian to run a marathon while breathing through a straw, right? Like if if you're if you're choking off the oxygen flow to your brain or to your rest of your body, um, that that's equivalent to what high energy costs do to a household, a business, a city, a country. It's just the amount of activity, amount of products, the amount of food, everything scales in proportion to how much energy you consume, right? Like another example is when you look at modern agriculture, okay, and you look at the life cycle costs for a single calorie of food that sitting there at your table, you're eating your steak and your potatoes and your salad, and there's 1,000 calories there. Well, think of the life cycle energy that went in from the farmer's field through to harvest, to distribution, processing, all the storage, the transportation, the refrigeration, the packaging. If you look at the life cycle, a single calorie that you consume, on average, about 90% of that energy is sourced geologically and not from photosynthesis, right? So if your energy costs, say, your geologically sourced hydrocarbons, your uranium, whatever it is that is driving that overall supply chain, if those costs are very high, well, yet the cost of energy, right, and your cost of food is going to be proportionally higher. Well, I guess
Well,
that's
Well, I think it's very interesting because you come from your scientific point of view, and the readers of the Macro Butler know that we look at the business cycle through the ability of an economy uh, to generate benefits, profits based on the cost of energy. So that's why I wanted to have you here in my podcast because from a macroeconomic point of view, we look at this, and in fact, we look at an economy being in a boost, in a boom or in a bust. It mostly depends on the ability of the economic players, I mean the household, the businesses, the listed companies of that economy to generate profit based on the cost of energy. So I think that it's really crucial for everyone from our single household to a multinational to get access to the cheapest source of energy because that's the way that everyone will create prosperity for its home. So I think that the first remark that you just gave us here confirm what we look at the, I would say, bigger picture from the macroeconomic point of view.
You know what? The further to this discussion, it's I gave a very non-academic answer, right? But if you look at every like human development index and human happiness index and all of these types of social science index out there, they all show the same thing, that on a log scale, the overall human happiness progress increases as the per capita energy increases. I'm happier the more energy I have, the ability to flip a light switch, right? So scholars worldwide know this to be true, and this is especially true for electricity.
So maybe we can move forward. What are the cheapest source of energy, and I mean, how can we access to this cheapest source of energy, and what are the challenges for the different countries in the world?
It's there's so much disparagence globally in terms of haves and have-nots, right? So in my backyard, North America, natural gas for the first time in basically ever, it has become cheaper on a per gigajoule basis than coal. And that if you look at the United States, the biggest reason why their absolute CO2 emissions have dropped over the past 20 years has nothing to do with regulatory punitive measures from, like, say, the US EPA to reduce stack emissions or that kind of thing, or fear of global warming or anything of the sort. It simply came down to it was cheaper to have a natural gas combined cycle power plant versus an advanced coal power plant. It's like about 2 to 3 times cheaper per gigajoule for natural gas um, versus coal. So it's pretty much the same way here now. And I'm in Alberta, and if my natural gas, the commodity prices here in the region in Western Canada, the last number of years, we're a stranded market. We have no LNG until maybe next month. Our first LNG export facility is going to be commissioned. Our natural gas prices have been as less than $1. If you look at LNG prices in your backyard, they've flirted with upwards of $15, I think, if last time I checked, over the last 5 years. So there's an order of magnitude difference in natural gas prices globally. Alberta and Russia, I think, are about the lowest jurisdictions in the world So, but the that's just here. Natural gas is very expensive where you're at. Coal is in China. It's very abundant in China. They have one of the largest reserves in the world, next to the United States, I believe, and then India. So they are going all in on coal. The last time I checked, they're commissioning, I think, numerous more brand new coal mines. And I think the research that I've done shows that by 2030, China will be consuming 2 times more coal than the rest of the world combined. And that's not just for power, that's for district heating, that's for petrochemicals, even synthetic fuels. So it's affordability and abundance are two different things, right? A lot of times, like thermal coal prices are often, like relative to natural gas prices here in Canada, are higher on a per gigajoule basis. But China's driven by geopolitical considerations as well, with how they're embracing their coal reserves, right? Their huge efforts to electrify their economy, electrification, electric vehicles, they're not being driven by any sense of altruism or Paris Accord considerations. Their biggest concern is a future geopolitical conflict where their access to the Persian Gulf is suddenly cut off because they're at war with the Indian Navy or the American Navy, right? So I
That
digress a little bit. I've gotten a little bit
no,
carried away there. Sorry.
no, that's perfect. I think that to introduce the geopolitical aspect into the equation is very interesting, and we can see that if we sit in North America or if we sit in Asia, in fact, the cheapest source of energy is different, and that's why I was saying that every government, every country should still consider to get access to the cheapest source of energy that is available domestically or regionally for them. And I mean, you talk about LNG and gas. I mean, from a macroeconomic point of view, the shale gas revolution in the US and in Canada has been a big boost for the economy of the US and Canada as well over the past few years, right? And then we had also the technological developments in this industry that has also helped to reduce the cost of production for this gas and oil producer in North America. So I guess that here, if I can ask, uh, what was the role of government? I mean, in this perspective of giving access to the cheapest and most abundant source of energy in different countries.
Well, I think the role of government, particularly national governments, is I think should be security, energy security, as much as it is energy affordability, right? Like, just particularly when you start thinking about the difference in the roles between a federal government and a state government or a provincial government. The latter tends to be concerned often more with affordability issues, and whereas the state government, well, they're going to be more concerned with security, right? So the role of government is to balance both considerations. As far as I'm concerned, I, uh, I often find myself saying here in Canada that that energy sovereignty is national security, and I say that often in the context of becoming overly reliant on technologies from autocratic supply chains, right? So like shutting down coal power plants that are perfectly functional, or natural gas power plants, likewise perfectly functional, all to, maybe make 3 decimal point changes in the global average temperature here in the province of Alberta or in Canada. Doesn't make any sense if that surrenders your sovereignty to an autocratic nation like China, right? It makes no sense these days. So I think people are getting that more and more. Since 2020, I think a lot of people's mind's eye has opened to the dangers of, call it, naivety of globalism, right? It can just be all one big happy family, and have one country doing something, building some gadget really well, and another one buying it, and there's no sovereignty, there's no independence, no resiliency domestically in terms of the ability to produce antibiotics, or liquid fuels, or steel, right? I think we're starting to wake up to that now, trying to find more of a balance.
Well, I would think that every country should be anti-fragile in a way that they should be self-sufficient in terms of energy supply as well as manufacturing supply. So, what I see in the future, and especially in an environment where the geopolitical environment is increasingly tense. More and more countries will have to focus first on domestic energy supply as well as domestic manufacturing supply. So, I mean, we are here to discuss about energy. I would think that in every country it would be domestic supply first, and then export will only come if there are
For
something
sure.
left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on that point,
The perfect case in point is the United States. They've only become a net exporter since the Obama administration, and they had legislation that limited and outlawed exports of hydrocarbons just up to, like, I think 2012 or whatever it was. So yeah, and that was why they just wanted to make sure Americans first, don't start selling hydrocarbons overseas you know until you've balanced the spreadsheet this side of the border.
well, and for the US, like for Canada, they are blessed with domestic supply, right? So, in fact, it's quite easy for them to prioritize their domestic market first, rather than looking to export outside their own borders.
Yeah, yeah. A real case in point is I, I find myself thinking quite often about um, these very things in the context of the European Union, right? Like what is going to be, what is their primary energy sources, particularly of the hydrocarbon type, right? They don't have a lot, at least in terms of like the context of plus 50 years, right? Um, uh, there's I wrote an article a couple months ago where I attempted to go through and do an inventory of all known reserves and resource numbers for gas, oil, coal globally, and of course, there's still a lot of places in the world that remain unexplored, like the Antarctic, the Southern Ocean, right? So who knows what that will look like? The Arctic Ocean as well. There may be some further resource numbers that will grow there. But as it stands right now, based on best available information, it seems North America is best situated in terms of, like, we have centuries worth of hydrocarbons here in Alberta and in Canada. That's not the case most places in the world. So, yeah, it's,
Well,
I don't know what it's like in.
I would say that from an Asian perspective, I mean, Indonesia and China, as you mentioned, are quite still rich in coal. So they probably will still use coal as a primary source of energy for many decades to go. And on the other side, clearly, the North America, the US and Canada are very rich in natural gas. So they are also quite safe in terms of their domestic supply. And clearly, and I mentioned this many times, uh, Europe is as the weakest uh, supply profile, especially that Europe is highly dependent from the Middle East now for its supply in terms of oil and also LNG. And I guess that's why we can see that, I mean, the future in Europe, especially for the manufacturing industry in Europe, will be very challenging because especially Germany has lost uh, one of its key advantage, which was before 2022 to get access to cheap gas and oil from
Oh,
Russia.
yeah, the deindustrialization of particularly Germany is quite rapid. UK, much the same. It's um, it's quite alarming to watch because it seems to be happening in real time so fast. You know, if they've been, for their economy has been dependent on access to cheap Russian gas for so long, and now they're being forced to accept dependence on the American and Middle Eastern LNG, which is on a gigajoule basis significantly more than what they're paying before. So, you know, the my 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 former background as a research scientist, my passion's always been energy development, technology, technology focus on, particularly on primary to secondary energy conversion concepts. So everything from lithium ion batteries, fuel cells, combustion. I uh, I I wanted. I often find myself having to remind people, or sometimes for the first time ever, educate people on just the classical definitions of primary energy versus secondary energy. Uh, an example of primary energy is like a waterfall coming down the side of a mountain, right? It's potential, gravitational potential energy. Um, by itself, you can't run a house on that. You need to put a turbine and a transmission system, power distribution. Oh, you gotta build a black box that can convert that primary energy into secondary energy. And examples of these black boxes are everywhere, like a hydroelectric dam, a nuclear power plant, a refinery, right? If you take raw crude oil and you produce ultra low sulfur diesel, winter blend, right? Or summer blend gasoline, those highly refined products, they are secondary forms of energy. And they're always more expensive on a per gigajoule basis. Gigajoule meaning billions of joules, right? Standard international units, a very common way to speak of energy. Likewise, we can use megawatt hours or kilowatt hours. They're the same, right? Um, from a design philosophy perspective, the future of technology development for these black boxes must start from the premise that the technology that will bring the most lasting benefit to humanity is one, the technology that brings the cost of, like, if here's the cost of primary energy, if here's the cost of secondary energy, in between you've got a black box. You got to bring that down. And the way you bring that down is through technological innovations in reducing the inherent costs and complexity of these black boxes. That could be a nuclear reactor, it could be a fuel cell, it don't matter. They're just a black box. And there are means of converting primary to secondary energy. So the right now, the technologies in terms of, say, electricity, the technology that produces the lowest secondary energy costs from natural gas would be combined cycle gas turbine technology. Nuclear has unfortunately over the last 2 generations seen very large price escalations. Total installed costs, capital costs have exploded. The inherent potential remains, right? Like the amount of thorium and uranium that exists globally is just mind-blowing. Particularly when you start looking at unconventional sources, say like seawater. If you look at how much uranium is in seawater, there's almost an infinite source of primary energy at current levels of energy consumption globally. But the chemistry set is expensive to collect and refine. The nuclear the reactor technologies. There's a tremendous amount of future innovation that must be done in order to tap that inherent longevity and the potential to bring value. So I hope how I describe primary and secondary energy to be helpful for you, for your audience.
Yes, thanks. In fact, I want to pick your brain on this a bit more because we have seen a lot of excitement around potential development of nuclear energy in the US, around the power AI related demand that will come in the next few years. And I wanted to ask you one question. Would the US shouldn't focus on generating this electricity rather
Sorry.
than uranium, because natural gas is much cheaper source of primary energy for the US and Canada. And then also, you just told us that in fact, generating secondary energy from natural gas is cheaper than from nuclear power.
Sorry, I had to drink something real quick. Without a doubt, the simple answer is natural gas. Combined cycle technologies are hands down the the most affordable, the easiest to build. The mission control technologies makes them um, optimal for use in near heavily populated areas like larger cities where your air shed is congested. You're worried about particulates and nitrous oxide emissions and that kind of stuff. Right? They're clean burning fuel compared to, say, coal or wood. So the AI sector, I think everybody's come to the grips with the idea that intermittent technologies like solar, wind, and batteries just they're not scalable and they don't produce the quality of power that data centers AI-focused data centers require. Like the quality of their power is hands down way poorer than a great big 200-ton rotating mass, turbine and generator system with tremendous amounts of inertia and frequency control and what have you. But nuclear is the future if humanity can get their minds around I think a more balanced view of the radiation, ionizing radiation. That's the number one reason that nuclear has not evolved basically in 2 generations is the unrealistic, I say, the unrealistic regulations that are out there, like there are regulations out there. They all assume that biological systems don't have the ability to repair from radiation damage. It's silly, really. So they think that all radiation exposures is in the risk of cancer is cumulative over your lifetime. It ignores the fact that we're exposed to radiation from space, exposed to radiation from the food we eat and the ground that we walk on, and ignores massive amounts of evidence out there that shows that our bodies are hardwired to continuously repair themselves from not just ionizing nuclear radiation, but say like hard UV radiation and X-rays. Right? So if we can get past that, I think the sky's the limit. I would dare say within 2 generations of intense focused research and development, private-public partnerships, we could drive the total installed cost down for nuclear down to be competitive with combined cycle gas turbine technologies.
Well, I could take the discussion in very different direction, but I just want to ask you one question. Why do you think that all these tech giant companies like Alphabet, OpenAI, support development of this SMR project, while in fact they could use natural gas generated power generation to straight away supply power to the data center?
Well, I think multiple reasons. I think the bean counters in the background know that natural gas reserves are finite, and that if we really truly scale the demand potential of this technology, well, you're going to blow through natural gas reserves here in North America and globally in no time at all, within a generation or 2. So nuclear is being viewed as the next step, right? So the bridge to that is gas, ultimately is nuclear. That's the philosophy. SMRs, I'm pretty skeptical. I'm pretty skeptical because I understand the basic laws of economics and economies of scale, right? And we've already learned from history, like every tier 1 nation has already has invented the wheel in terms of, is a small reactor more cost effective or a large reactor? We figured that out in Canada by the late 1960s. It's large reactors are the per unit cost of energy produced, like dollars per kilowatt hour, are the cheap. Small are expensive. So it seems like people are wanting to reinvent the wheel. I'm pretty skeptical that they're going to be successful in that regard. So I think everybody's eventually going to come back to realize that bigger is better. It's hugely more expensive on an absolute basis, but cheaper from a retail consumer's perspective.
Interesting. I also read a few days ago or weeks ago, China just launched thorium nuclear power station. What's your view on this? And I mean, is it just experimental, or do you think that this could be the next generation of power generation?
I don't know if it's a next generation. I believe that we're going to see numerous fuel cycles emerge. Thorium is been around forever. Like China is just basically replicating what the United States did back in the 1960s. A molten salt thorium reactor, Copenhagen Atomics, I think they're called. There's also another molten salt thorium based SMR vendor in Western Europe. They are well advanced down the path. They're not at a prototype level yet, like China is, but it's not uranium or thorium. There's different advantages. One of the advantages to thorium is you don't produce what's called your actinides. So like plutonium or mercium or that kind of stuff. These long-lasting, high radiotoxic isotopes that can take 100,000 plus years to break down naturally. They don't produce it. They most of the radioactive elements that are created are much shorter, living half-lives of down to a century. So that's one of the perceived advantages there. So, yeah.
So would you think that I mean some countries would get an advantage to move to the thorium way of generating power, or is it kind of limited to very specific case?
District heating is conceptually like process heat, steam generation. If you don't have access to natural gas or coal, but you've got lots of thorium, yeah, from an engineering science basis, you most certainly could use it to produce high quality heat to drive industrial processes. But when if you come up with your levelized cost of energy kind of thing, um, it's hard to conceive of a technological endpoint where the heat produced could be cheaper than natural gas on a dollars per unit energy basis. It's a natural gas burner is just such a low tech concept, right? So it's people have been toying with this idea here in Alberta off and on over the years. The idea about bringing in some nuclear, just bring in a reactor, put it up there in the oil sands. Some of these steam generation plants consume, like I did the math the other day, I think at the top of my head, a 100,000 barrel per day bitumen production facility in northern Alberta consumes about 14 gigawatts of natural gas. 14 gigawatts. That's like, put that on a scale, like Alberta, like electricity, its grid for a population of 5 million, on average is around 10 gigawatts of electricity. So, there's 4 million barrels of bitumen produced in the oil sands in Alberta every day. And so the numbers are just off the charts, how much energy you need for high quality industrial heat for steam generation in a region like northern Alberta. If you were to start bringing in nuclear power plants there, the cost difference for a natural gas burner, right, and versus a nuclear reactor, where both are producing steam, there's like an order of magnitude difference in capital costs.
Well, I mean, from the investment point of view, and I wrote a note, a newsletter on this a few months ago. In fact, I always thought that for North America and the US in particular, it would be better to focus first on natural gas as the main supply for AI related demand power, because in fact the US is blessed of natural gas supply, and it could always use the gas for its own use rather than exporting the gas. And also the US has done quite also a relatively good job in terms of pipeline infrastructure. So I would have think that rather than going into a more adventurous new technology, these guys like the Google and Meta of the world should first focus on building a natural gas power station rather than spending money on a technology that we don't really know if it will be first successful and first profitable one day.
Use what you got, go with the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of a good way to move to government policies, and or uh, government can make a country successful or not successful in using the cheap and abundant source of energy. So I want to pick your brain here on what are the key for success from a government point of view.
That's a pretty broad question. Wide open. All right. Um, I think that after energy security, I think policies that matter and are the ones that are going to provide long-term a long-term path to prosperity and national security. When I say long-term, I'm talking like 7 generations, right? So, um, what I think you find through history is that often a country, a culture will have a renaissance and a renaissance of clarity on what type of policies are required to move everybody forward, right? And so you'll see, like in Canada, we had a period from the post World War II era up until the 1970s, much the same in the United States, where it was just a massive boost in prosperity, industrial capacity, environmental progressiveness. It basically every metric. There was massive investments in hydro, in nuclear, in pipelines, transmission systems, you name it, right? But I don't know, something happened in the 80s and 90s where that we lost the momentum. And as a result, I think we lost a lot of the innovative capacity. We lost a lot of industrial manufacturing capacity, construction, right? Uh, you know, I did a report recently. I'm going to publish some of the findings here soon, where I went through and looked at how much hydroelectric capacity and nuclear was added in Canada during the 1970s. That was our peak. And we had upwards, I think, we added, for a population of 20 million people, we added around 35 gigawatts of power during the 1970s. We had, if you look at the estimates on the size of the workforce, it was like an army. You had to have like 150,000 hard hats, bulldozers, and crane operators working around the clock to build that much industrial capacity, that much energy capacity in such a short period of time. So the policies that matter are ones that where we look at things and go, hey, we have to keep the ball rolling. We cannot lose a skilled labor for crane operators, for manufacturing ball bearings, for we can't drop the ball on having a perpetual workforce. So you're moving from one project over to another. You're always building, and so you're always innovating. You're preserving that knowledge, and it's always improving, right? Um, I, I I think the role of government is to recognize the importance of those types of policies and getting it right and putting together that what does that look like to ensure and to incentivize and to regulate to, to make sure that you don't get these boom bust cycles over time. Like when I think of 2050, net zero 2050, that's a prime example of a boom bust cycle, right? You have to retrofit everything, tear down the stuff that's high CO2 emitting, replace it with stuff. Hurry, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. We got to rebuild it all now. Plus, we got to add all these data centers and EVs and all this kind of stuff, and we got 15 years to build it out again. Well, hello, we don't have a workforce to do that because we stopped manufacturing and constructing big projects a generation ago. You see where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't know in particular in Canada, but I look at other Western countries and also in the US, the skilled laborers required, uh, I mean, to move ahead with electrification and all this new energy project is clearly lacking, right? So, I mean, this will be a challenges, many challenges for this government is to recreate this skilled labor force that is able to help the country to move forward in the energy cycle.
I think that is the role of government. It's to lead, right? Not to do the work, but to lead, and put up some speed limits and some incentives, along the way. So, uh,
Well, I mean, if I may say, from my point of view, the government can help to guide people to move into this kind of jobs. And what we have seen, at least in the Western world, and I mean, I take the example of the US that I know better than Canada, is because of all the bureaucracy that has been around for so many years. I mean, young people prefer to become lawyers or to become to look for a job at Wall Street rather than to become an engineer, right? And so I think that the role of government here is, I mean, to create an environment where these skilled labor jobs are attractive for many people, and also create an environment, I would think that where you can promote to become an engineer or to become a crane operator rather than to become a TikToker, for example. So
we need a lot more welders and pipe fitters and millwrights than we do nuclear engineers to build a nuclear power plant, right? Probably 100 to 1.
no, so I think that the role of government is to look how they guide the younger generation into this job, which can be very good jobs to have for many people, right?
If they can get the data analysis down properly, and they can focus on the meat and potatoes, uh, I think they can do it. Unfortunately, today it seems like politicians aren't as interested in meat and potatoes as they used to be, right?
Uh, and so, why can't why can't we succeed or fail depending on the energy policy? What do you think?
Well, again, as a Canadian, I just simply look at the last 10 years. We had in 2015, as most people know, we elected a Justin Trudeau. He was a very progressive, uh, far left liberal party. In Canadian history, the Liberals tend to be quite centrist, but Justin Trudeau took the party very far left and was able to rally other far left parties in the federal arena around himself. The number one thing that he really focused on, I felt, over his 10 years here that just ended in the last month, in the last couple months, is he really wanted to drive the energy transition and get us off of hydrocarbons and to ignore all data that suggests otherwise as a good idea. And so for 10 years, he incentivized this solar panels, biofuels, you know, I digress. It's all familiar. People these days, they know what it's all about. But when you look at the previous 10 years to Justin Trudeau, to the 10 years under Justin Trudeau, we went from a strong dollar. We went from being one of the highest performing countries in the world in terms of the our fiscal capacity, our the strength of our economy. We came out of the 2008 recession probably better than any G7 country, right? I was under a conservative Stephen Harper. So, we come out the end of Justin Trudeau's uh, 10 years, and we're at the lowest per capita GDP growth rate in the OECD. So, when you look at energy policy under the Trudeau Liberals, yeah, you applied a carbon tax that was so punitive and escalating so fast that by 2030, the rate at which they were increasing it, was, take natural gas for example. If a natural gas producer was getting $3 a gigajoule for selling natural gas into the marketplace, the federal government was going to be making $9 to $12. So the government was massively inflating the price, the retail price. So if I'm a farmer and I got to dry my grain at harvest because my grain was a little bit too high on moisture content, and I have to use natural gas. Oh my God, that's so expensive. Now I'm gonna, instead of paying $3 a gigajoule, I'm gonna have to be spending $15 a gigajoule total, right? It's crazy. So the stagnation that has been produced has had huge generational impacts here in Canada. And the homelessness, the 10 cities that have sprung up all across the country in such a short period of time is mind blowing. It's quite scary. So it, I think most people are under the opinion that it can be reversed. You just need a job and you need your costs to go down. Your purchasing power has to increase. And the easiest way to do that is eliminate the carbon tax. And they did. the new Liberal Prime Minister that came in, Mark Carney, one of the first things he did was stroke of a pen, drove that price down to zero. So, the price of the pump, the price of natural gas, everything has dropped. We're immediately seeing some relief. But yeah, so you can get it wrong, and then you can get it right. And you can't argue. As far as I'm concerned, you can't. These are universal laws, almost like the law of gravity. It's if you penalize your most productive people in your society, you will produce less. And the people who are most productive in society are almost always those who consume the most energy.
That's true.
That's just my take.
Thank you. I mean, it's already almost an hour that we are talking. I still have many, many questions to ask you, but I don't want to get too much of your time. So, if you wanted to, I would say, summarize in 5-10 minutes what we have discussed today for our audience, what would be the key takeaway?
Summarize. Number one, I would say primary energy is not a fallacy. A fallacy. There are people these days who like pro wind, solar, the energy transition people who are arguing that primary energy does not matter anymore. And they're wrong. And I say they're wrong because they want you to ignore the fact that the jurisdictions that are producing these technologies consume gargantuan quantities of primary energy to build those black boxes, right? The solar panels, the wind turbines, right? So like China consumes, as I said, by 2030, they'll be consuming twice as much coal as the rest of the world combined to drive their industrial manufacturing processes and to and to make their lives of their people better. They got a big population, and they want more. So number one, primary energy matters. Number two, secondary energy. If you want to modernize society, you need more electricity, not less. You need to incentivize electricity consumption. But if you do that without having enough generation capacity, you get runaway inflation. So in order to have a lot of capacity, you got to focus on innovation to drive down price, the capital costs of your technology, whether it's gas turbines or nuclear reactors. You got to focus on that. You got to bring down the price difference between primary energy and secondary energy, and that's always a function of your capital cost for your conversion technology, no matter what you're talking about. We need as a species. I believe so firmly in nuclear, the future of nuclear. When I say future, I'm talking 7 generations down the road. We have to make it an almost an existential focus to innovate to drive the cost of nuclear down. Because if we do, the carrot is clear. Massive decoupling of our modern existence from environmental impact and near permanent, infinite amounts of energy. That is the carrot. The mountain that we have to climb is immense, and there are so many other distractions along the way. Policies matter, and we have to get our politicians back to the basics of focusing on meat and potatoes like national security, um, sovereignty of supply chains. Um, it's having skilled labor forces that successional planning of of your population and your industrial your industrial sectors. These types of things need to be what's guiding us, not constructs like, is 1 ppm change in CO2 going to end the world tomorrow? And should the mayor of every village across the countryside make that more important than, replacing the water mains down Main Street every 30 years, right? I guess that's my 5 minute summary.
Oh, that's great. I think that we all hope that governments and everyone who has the power to move things focus on developing technology that give us access to more and cheaper energy, because this will probably create a prosperity boom for everyone. And that's what I also think is the most important in the next decade, we'll say.
Absolutely. Preaching to the choir, Laurent.
Well, thanks for your time. As I said, I still have many questions that I could have asked you, but I think that we could reconvene for another session. Where people can find you? I know that you started recently a Substack, so where people can find you?
Yes, for sure. I'm on Substack, Dr. Joseph Fournier. If you go Dr. Joseph Fournier, you'll find me really easy. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's just Joseph Fournier. So, yeah, I just started on Substack about a month ago. I think you found me about after my third article.
Yes,
So,
and it has been a pleasure to read your Substack. I learn a lot. I have a financial background, but I try to understand uh, the scientific and kind of point of view, because I really believe in the importance of giving everyone access to abundant and cheap energy to spread prosperity across the world. So I think that this has been a very interesting conversation. I will put the link to your Substack to my reader, and I think that you
thank
will
you.
also share this video with your reader. So I think that would be very interesting for all of them to get a sense of what comes next for all of us. I wanted to thank you, and I look forward to have you again here on the Macro Butler podcast.
I look forward to that possibility as well, Laurent. You have yourself a great day, and I'm going to go to bed now.
Thank you.